Can you start just by telling us a little bit about your background and your business and just kind of how you got where you are today?
Sure. So my company is Russell Marketing. We're a small 8-person team, and we do launch marketing. So we help product launches, app launches, any sort of launches, really that, that we can support with our 5-step launch system. Prior to this, actually, I started out in the media space, and I was helping marketing and launching websites in the media space. Then I transitioned into nonprofit world for a little while. I was launching events in the nonprofit world. And when the nonprofit I was working with relocated, and the commute became a little bit far for my liking, which I'm sure that many entrepreneurs have that moment when they realize that working for a different company or someone else isn't for them. That's when I realized. So I embarked on my own thing, first freelancing, and a couple of years after that, realizing I had a good thing going, and had the business opportunity to develop my own agency. And so that's what I did end of 2017, early 2018.
Awesome. And so I understand it wasn't a huge success on the first attempt. You have this sort of great story about trying to sell ebooks. Do you want to share that?
Sure. I went to the nonprofit world because, as many do, I wanted to do some more meaningful work. And so when I decided to leave that world and create my own business, I started first focusing on nonprofits and social enterprises. And what I really wanted to do was training and education, kind of like you do here, Dawn. So I created a lot of content. I spent about the first 6 months of my business creating email sequences, advertising content, video content, paid content like ebooks and courses, and no one wanted it. So in that time period, I sold one ebook. It was an ebook around email marketing. It was $9, I believe. And I just realized that wasn't going to be a space I was going to be successful in. So I had a friend who was working in the launch space. That was a space that I knew already, given my previous experience. And so I took a bit of a pivot and moved away from creating training content for nonprofits and social enterprises, and started being more of a service-based business for other entrepreneurs.
Specifically focused on launches.
Specifically focused on launches, that's correct. We do e-commerce as well, but we are a launch marketing agency.
Yeah. So I imagine that there's something from that ebook experience that is really relevant to how to do launches that don't flop. Because when I hear you tell the story, it sounds like you invested quite a bit of time in preparing this content and then seemed a little bit surprised at the end that nobody wanted to buy it.
Well, yeah, surprise. Obviously, I wanted people to buy it, and I wanted to become a successful thought leader in that space. In that experience for me, I put it down to credibility. You know, I know marketing. I've been in marketing my whole life, so I'm fairly confident that what I created had value, and the way I approached it was the right way. But ultimately, at that time in my life, this was 5-6 years ago, no one cares who I am. I don't have a track record. I didn't have a track record.
Right.
And so why someone would buy content from me was the missing piece of that jigsaw. And I think that's ultimately the reason why it didn't work. And yeah, I mean, that plays into what we do now. Credibility is massive for a lot of our new entrepreneur clients, and we focus heavily on that.
Do you feel like there was enough customer discovery as you were building your content? Do you feel like, you know, you focused maybe on making something that was really great and were surprised that nobody bought it, but did you sort of iterate on it and show lots of people during the process and get buy-in and get feedback?
No, I didn't do that. What I would say, you know, I understood the pain points of nonprofit marketing because I just come from nonprofit marketing. I think what I didn't understand was budgetary challenges within the nonprofit space as much. So I wasn't a decision maker when I was in the nonprofit world, really. I was young, early professional. And if I'm trying to reach decision makers, they're the ones with the budget power. And the budget power in nonprofits is a tough world. And investing in marketing content, training content is just has to be really special to make that list. And so that's something I perhaps missed in that discovery phase.
So when you started your agency, I know that you initially tried to do some networking. Did you join some of those networking groups?
Right, yeah. I mean, I consider myself quite introvert, and I
Uh-huh.
also consider myself very data driven. So I knew that I had to really understand what worked for me, and I wanted to quickly understand what didn't in terms of driving sales and bringing on customers. Networking, everyone talks about networking.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried it. I tried networking. I did a lot of free strategy calls, free consulting calls. I did a lot of kind of lead magnet type stuff, creating leads.
Yeah.
I did a lot of partnerships, and I really granularly tracked all this because I wanted to understand if I didn't have to go and network, I wanted to know that as soon as possible because I hated it. And so I tracked it all in a spreadsheet, and I understood the time I committed to each of these acquisition methods to find clients and what the rewards were. And I did that for 6 months, really, really granular time tracking. And after those 6 months, networking hadn't driven me one customer. For the free strategies, the free consulting calls, which I remember sitting at my kitchen table, creating these free strategies, hoping it would result in business, and none of them did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just my situation, but by tracking that and paying really close attention to that, I was able to get those things off my plate as quickly as possible. And I don't think I've ever gone to a networking event again.
I love that not wanting to go to a networking event ever again is the thing that really put the fire in your belly to get you to find a customer acquisition channel.
Yeah, that's totally true. Maybe if I was a different kind of founder or I had a co-founder who was great at that, then wonderful. Everyone around me at the time was heavy into network events, so I thought, well, that must be the way forward. For me,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely not. I'm rubbish in those scenarios, and that was proven by the fact that I didn't generate one customer despite all the events I went to.
So you ultimately did unlock a customer acquisition channel through Indiegogo, through a partnership with Indiegogo. How did that come about? And then how did you really grow that and ultimately expand it?
Yeah, absolutely, I did. And it was actually the friend of mine at Indiegogo in the launch space who convinced me to drop what I was doing with my nonprofit training and move to providing services for entrepreneurs and their launches. They had, at the time, Indiegogo had a new kind of offering for their creators, the people that launched on their platform. And they didn't have, because it was so new, there were no service providers to support it. And so they had lots of people wanting help
Mm-hmm.
who and no one to send them to. So as a favor to me, I was struggling at the time. He started sending some of these my way,
Mm-hmm.
and it became a really fruitful partnership. I did a great job with those leads I got. So I made a name for myself with that, with the Indiegogo community and that company. And I realized, hold on a second, by working, by not necessarily seeking the customer directly, but by working with other vendors and service providers who have similar clientele to me,
Mm-hmm.
seems to be a really neat strategy for finding clients. And
Mm-hmm.
additionally, when another service provider sends someone to you, that's credibility. That's not me reaching out to someone
Great
to say,
point.
hey, work with me. That's someone else recommending
Yep.
me. And so that solved a couple of problems and worked really well. So that was absolutely probably the primary, for at least the first couple of years, the really primary source of clients was just a handful of these partnerships. And Indiegogo, Kickstarter, we're an expert partner for, a couple of PR agencies perhaps, who our clients needed their help. So
Mm-hmm.
when it was appropriate, we could send them over, and their clients needed our help. So when appropriate, they send us over. And that kind of B2B relationship I had, that's one I'm personally much more comfortable with, just one-on-one conversation on a phone call or something like that. And that added element of credibility solved a big problem for me at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So building those partnerships, building those relationships was really critical early on. Less so we rely on it nowadays, but that early traction, that then had the ripple effect of word of mouth,
Yep.
experiences like this where I have these kind of great conversations and word gets out. So I don't lean as heavily on those as I used to, but what they did is they provided the spark to ignite the organic growth that we're seeing now.
I love it. And did you have a formal relationship with Indiegogo or Kickstarter? Like, how does that work? Were you a certified partner? Did that develop over time? Is there commission exchange? So what does it look like, that structure of the partnership itself?
Well, for Indiegogo and Kickstarter, you are a kind of certified partner. You have to go through a review process. Now, that's not to say that Indiegogo, for example, will never send a potential client to someone who's not on that list.
Right.
But it's obviously useful to be on that list. You're a first
Yep.
priority. So yeah, in those cases, you are a certified partner. And I mean, having good support for their campaigners, for both Kickstarter and Indiegogo, is obviously massively beneficial for them. So it's kind of a you scratch my back kind of scenario, and it's a good deal for everybody, including the campaigner, the entrepreneur. Now, with some of the other partners we have, agencies, sometimes they're kind of referral based, where there's a percentage, 5%, 10% referral fee or something like that. For others, it's just a more casual, you send leads our way, and vice versa. And I would say, over the years, maybe I have a few dozen of these partnerships, but not all of them work out. Some of them you have the preliminary conversation, maybe you exchange one lead and then you never hear from them again.
Yeah.
So there are plenty like that. But
yeah,
as I said at the start, we're a small team. I plan on keeping it a small team. And so we don't need dozens of leads a day to make our lives work well. We only need a handful, and we've certainly got a handful of partners that provide them. So it's great.
Yeah, I think that you make a really great point there about partnerships as a sales channel, because ultimately it needs to be a win-win for everybody, right? And if it's only a win for one side or one partner, the leads dry up pretty quickly. So I think it's really interesting that in the case of Indiegogo, you're the customer, the person who's doing the launch, the business is doing the launch, needs this. You appreciate the leads, and Indiegogo and Kickstarter want to make their customers successful. So it works for all three parties in the deal, which makes a lot of sense. And those are really the kinds of partnerships that tend to be much more successful.
Yeah, and delivering value is what's going to build their relationship. So, for example, I said maybe we have 3 dozen folks. We know the ones that we can send clients to, and we know they're going to have a fantastic experience, and they're going to provide, they have a great time, have a lot of success. We also know when perhaps we've started a relationship and we send a couple of clients their way and we don't hear good news. Maybe we misjudge them a little bit. So I think it's, well, yes, there's value for everyone in these relationships. It's also super critical to recognize that value won't be just sustained indefinitely without really making sure you're delivering on what you promise.
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier that there's a 5-step process you work through with your own clients when they do product launches or launches of any kind. So it could be business or product, right? Or app launches. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Sure. And yeah, it can apply to anything. I think with products, hardware products, it's most useful because generally hardware products are more expensive. They have bigger margins. There's more breathing room to play with financially. If you're developing an app, if they're free, you're very restricted with what you can invest in. So there are definitely products that it works better with, but it can work with anything. I've used it for events. I use it for my own business. I've got a book coming out soon. I'm using it for the book. I use it for clients, software, hardware, and I'll run through it quickly, and hopefully everyone can catch it. But feel free to Q&A if needed. So it starts with validation. Step 1 is validation, and that's a short period of time for us. It's about 4 weeks, where we are proving that this product, priced at this price point, targeting this audience, and messaged in this way, is going to be successful.
Yeah, in the software industry, we call that product market fit.
Exactly right. Yeah, product market fit. And the goal there is just to make sure we're not wasting our time, make sure the entrepreneurs aren't wasting their time. And as horrible as it might be, on the rare occasion when we tell someone, look, we don't think you're going to be successful with this idea, it might be they might be working on it for 2 years. It's a horrible thing to hear. However, the other option is to let it go, which is what we used to see. Think, okay, I'm going to work really hard for this client. really try my best and see it struggle. Because
Yeah.
the data is the data. So you have to face that. So this validation period is all about just understanding, is this the right place to invest our time and our money and our efforts, both for us, but also for the creator, the entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Once we've gone through that process, we're going to move into steps 2 and 3, which run concurrently at the same time: audience acquisition and audience engagement. And that generally last a couple of months. And that's all about building up a list of potential customers. It could be email list, Facebook group, SMS,
Mm-hmm.
chatbot, WhatsApp, whatever's the best medium for this particular offer. But it's all about building up that acquisition, acquiring those prospective customers, and making them excited. So step 3, engagement, getting them excited about the product, the offer, introducing yourself, making sure that they have a bond and a relationship with you as the founder, making sure that they are aware of timelines and launch dates, and making sure that they are fully aware of the benefits of the product, and
Mm-hmm.
if they have any questions, those questions are answered and resolved. So steps 2 and 3 is what we call that pre-launch phase. As I said, a couple of months in the lead up to the launch.
And is that pre-launch phase very, very multi-channel? What I'm hearing for you is it sounds like you probably send emails, you probably do some paid ads, maybe on social, you probably do organic posting. Is it very multi-channel?
It is. We want it to be multi-channel because
Mm-hmm.
I don't like risk. The whole point of the validation and the system I have is to minimize the risk. And
Mm-hmm.
so by using different channels and creating different touch points with each potential customer, you're minimizing your risk. So let's one case, for example, we had a launch, data was looking great, and all of a sudden, 2 days before launch, I think it was, for some reason, their domain got blacklisted in MailChimp or whatever the email platform was. So
Yikes.
we were sending out emails. We had great opening rate. And then the day before launch or 2 days before launch, we send out an email and it gets like a 4% open rate. And we
Right.
were in trouble because at that point in time, this was maybe 3 years ago, we didn't have multiple touch points. So multiple touch points just reduces that risk. So while
Yep.
obviously multi-channel is what we do and what we recommend, I don't think people need to be overwhelmed by that, because at its simplest version, it could just be a simple email list. It could just be your own personal email list. It could be a small Facebook group. So yes, ideally multi-channel, as many as possible. Don't put all the eggs in one basket, but also uh, you don't need to be investing a lot of money to take these action steps. You can just prioritize and focus on whatever you have access to.
And do you only focus on digital channels, or do you also use offline channels like events or direct mail to the house?
Offline is great. We
Mm-hmm.
used to do more offline pre-COVID. For
Yeah.
example, demo days. If we have a product, especially a more expensive product like an e-bike or something people need to touch and experience before making a purchasing decision, we used to do these demo days and they were great. So we'd
Mm-hmm.
just hit the streets in San Francisco where I used to live or wherever with the product and show it to people, get people there, give people an experience. Less so now. We still nudge and urge clients to do kind of launch day events in particular, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, last year and a half, offline events haven't really been a priority.
Yep. All right, cool.
Right, so yeah, this is at this point of the launch system, we've got people in, we've got people excited, people are looking forward to the launch, they know about the launch, and so then the launch occurs, and that's called step 4, audience acquisition. And audience acquisition is kind of what it says on the tin. It's all about converting the audience you've brought in that pre-launch period and getting early traction. So what you want is you want early traction for a few reasons: social proof, credibility. You can take them, hey, I got 100 customers, 500 customers, however you want to say
Mm-hmm.
it. There's also data. That's the first time you're going to be getting real sales data. So you can
Mm-hmm.
understand, who are my customers, how are they coming, what do they like, and so on. And then that will give you a foundation for future growth. Like I said, actually with my business, how something I didn't have when I tried to sell my ebooks and training content was credibility. If
Mm-hmm.
I sold 100 or 500 ebooks to 500 customers and could get that data and that feedback and that social proof, maybe it would have been a different story, you know, but I didn't have that at the time. So
Yeah.
that
You know what? That social proof, that feedback also has this kind of multiplier effect. So for example, you mentioned that you have a book coming out, right?
Right.
So when you launch your book, if you launch it, let's say you launch it on Amazon and you line people up so that they're purchasing on the first day, once they purchase, you can get onto an Amazon bestseller list, which then gives you even more exposure, right? So there's this like real sort of multiplier effect if you can get that really early social proof.
Yeah, from two, you bring up a good point of the platform. So some platforms like Amazon, Indiegogo, Kickstarter have algorithms you can play into with traction, but also just the general, like I said, about how partnerships work for me. But now it's more about organic growth. That organic growth doesn't come without the early traction. So the traction spikes just organically and word of mouth, and that ripple effect will occur after the early traction. So that's not everyone goes for that big bonanza on launch day where they're going to get loads of sales and have big traction. However, one of the advantages to that kind of strategy is, as you suggest, just a kind of a big bang explosion on day one that's going to spread out and make life a little bit easier in the near term.
Yep. Yeah. And I would stress that it doesn't really have to be an either or. It doesn't have to be nobody uses my product and then all of a sudden on launch day, we open it up to everybody. It could be that you're acquiring a few customers here and there. They're really beta customers or demo customers. They're really testing it. Like in the case of the ebook that you launched, if you had, you know, found some people early on who could be readers of that content and see if they liked it, even buyers of that content, so that on the day that you had the big launch, you could feel a little bit more confident that the product is ready for prime time. That's a way to like build up some credibility in the product before you even have that initial launch. And also in the case of something like a book, for example, it gives you the ability to get some feedback early on, maybe even some quotes that you can use when you're promoting the book and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. We love it when oftentimes, obviously, we're working with launches whereby clients looking to produce the product, because they don't really have consumer-ready products available yet. But when they do, what you're suggesting there, Dawn, is a fantastic strategy. Just getting into a few people's hands, get those beta users, testimonials, understand what the challenges are, understand the benefits. And not only do you have those learnings, but if you can, let's say you have a Facebook group, if you sprinkle those beta users into the Facebook group, then when you launch, you can have those folks coming in and saying, "Hey, everyone, this is legit. I've been lucky enough to try this out for 2 weeks and I love it." And again, you've got your social proof there.
Yeah. Awesome. So that's step 4. What's number 5?
Step 4. Step 5 is scale. So usually with a launch period, you've got your day of launch, and most often clients are looking for early traction, so a very strong day one. But then they usually have a longer launch period. Maybe it's 30 days, maybe it's 60 days, where they want to outsell their first production run, or whatever their goal might be. So we've got another 30, 60 days to maintain that traction, grow that traction. And so with scale for us, it's all about taking the data from validation, from pre-launch, from this launch now, and plugging it back into our marketing efforts to better understand the consumer, better understand the positioning, better understand the audiences, and run ongoing marketing efforts such as advertising, kind of referral contest kind of stuff, to increase the success of that immediate launch period through till whenever it concludes. As I say, usually maybe 30, 60, 90 days is that core launch period. So rather, we don't just want to have a strong day one, but we want to have a strong day one all the way through to day 60. And so scale is all about maintaining that.
So are you running different campaigns or making different offers or targeting different groups during that post-launch period?
All of the above. You brought up a couple of good things there that I'm going to focus on. Number one is running different campaigns. Yeah, absolutely. I talk a lot actually with clients about kind of finding the gold, because with every launch, there's going to be some what I call golden nuggets. Maybe it's an audience, or maybe it's a platform or a marketing strategy, and that's not going to last forever. But when you're in the launch period, because it's a really short period of time, you can usually like double down on this area, this area of gold that you found, and focus on that. So building out campaigns around what you've seen success in. So if you see success in ads with a particular audience in the US, double down on that. New campaigns around that. But you also mentioned a really good one of different offers. And I think people tend to forget or don't really think as much about how much easier it is to sell an existing customer than a new customer. So during the launch period, what we love to do is we have a launch day, maybe it's a particular product. And then if it makes sense, doesn't make sense for every kind of product, but if we can then, through that launch 60 days, have a couple of additional launches, maybe we were launching an accessory, or we're launching a different color, or we're launching
or an audiobook version or something like that.
Or an audiobook version, yeah, something that will re-engage existing customers, deliver more revenue without spending more money on acquiring new customers, and continue to spike and see that traction. So both of those are wonderful strategies.
So how far in advance should business owners really begin planning for these launches? If somebody were to engage Russell Marketing, for example, for a launch, how far in advance would you want to hear from them?
In advance of the launch day itself, I would say we want to hear from them maybe 4 months out.
Okay.
In order to start our work and have a good timeline for that launch success. But I'd say that with a bit of an asterisk, because we talked about step one, which is validation.
Yep.
And when we say, okay, come to us 4 months before we launch, that might be to someone who they're already a year into building their prototype and they're feeling good. They've got a lot of work behind them. On the other end of things, you might have someone who just has a really good idea and they think, I think this idea could be good. They've got it just on the back of a napkin. It's not a prototype, it's nothing. They could still come to us, because they've got to run this validation anyway. They want to validate before they build a prototype.
Yep.
This is a product the market wants. So I would say consider it in a couple of ways. One, if you're already well underway with your production or your prototyping, this is happening, you're going to launch this product and you just need help, then about 4 months out would be ideal. Or if you already have got a product and you're perhaps years away from actually launching anything, you can still work with a launch agency or a launch partner or even run it yourself. But think about the step one of that system, validation. Do that, then you can go away again, other bits and pieces, and revisit the rest of the system closer to when you're actually ready.
So what if you sort of failed to plan for this big launch and you kind of launched quietly and you've been selling a few of your services or a few of your products, and then you realize, there's really something here. I think I'd like to go out now and make a big deal about this and do a proper launch. How long after you started selling have you just missed the boat? Like, is it too far, that it's no longer news anymore? It's not really a launch anymore.
It's a good question. I think it would depend on the offer and depend on how you want to launch. For example, if you're launching a water bottle, and you've sold 100 units, people love it, and now you want to sell 5,000 units on Kickstarter. You can't do that because you already sold the product, and Kickstarter requires it to be a new product in the market. So you miss the boat there. If you sell 500 units early on and 6 months later think, okay, I've got something here, let's turn it into a full-time job, perhaps.
Yep.
You could absolutely do an e-commerce launch 6 months in, a year in. I think it starts becoming less meaningful from a launch standpoint when you'll have saturated the market somewhat and you'll have been using the same channels repeatedly. Because at that point, a lot of the strategies that we want to use, like I talk about these golden nuggets, finding these golden nuggets, you may have already used them because you've been around for a while. And so you won't get the trajectory you might hope for. So I do think it depends, but generally speaking, I would say it's perfectly good to do a beta, early run, maybe 100, 500, 1,000 units of sales. And then you want to do a launch, but pushing it much beyond that, pushing it much beyond maybe 6 months of beta testing, I think you're then going to be, it's not that you can't do it, but you're going to be limiting the opportunity and the potential of the results.
Yeah. Yep. One thing we haven't really talked about is the role of public relations in the launch. We've talked about marketing and we've talked a bit about online versus offline marketing, but what about public relations? And is this something that is, part of the services that you guys provide? Do you work with PR people? Do you recommend that business owners do their own outreach? How do you handle public relations? Because I imagine that would be a really useful launch tactic.
So public relations isn't something we do. Public relations maybe 4 years ago in the launch space, especially the pre-order space, and by pre-order I mean Kickstarter, Indiegogo.
Yep.
It was a big thing. However, in the pre-order space on these platforms, people get burned, campaigns don't deliver, and media outlets have taken a much stricter stance on that. So oftentimes nowadays, until a product is in the market selling, you may have a hard time getting the press you want.
Right.
And then additionally, or partly because of that, the return on investment from PR efforts can be lower early on than other channels. And so if someone has a limited budget, and limited time, limited ability to run marketing campaigns, PR generally isn't something I would start with. I would focus on digital, such as advertising, because you're going to get quicker, higher return from those channels. And you're going to invest less time in getting those returns, because PR, you might reach out to 100 media outlets and hear back from none. It's very time consuming. So I would say that if you want to do a big launch, let's say you want to do $1 million plus and you have the budget to match that, then absolutely PR is going to be a nice piece of the mix. It's just diversifying your strategy. It does give you credibility when you get it. It's lovely to be able to put, featured by Forbes or whatever it might be on your product page, on your sales page. But again, even if you're investing heavily in PR, it's unlikely to directly return ROI, return on your ad spend, return on your investment. Instead, it's more of an additional element that will help and support your other channels, such as giving you the credibility that people will buy from you in the first place. So I would say it's a nice to have. It's definitely something you want to explore once you're launched, but in the pre-launch, as you're preparing for that launch, it wouldn't be my first go-to strategy, especially if I have a limited budget.
Okay, interesting, because we had, for example, a guest on from Rotate Watches, which launched on Kickstarter, and she attributes a lot of her success to the PR outreach she did. She got a ton of coverage early on, and it wasn't just great for her credibility, but it also helped drive awareness of her product. So I know we've definitely seen examples of businesses where they said PR has helped not just with credibility, but with that overall awareness. But, to your point, it is harder to attribute individual customers to public relations versus attributing them. The tracking is just not the same, obviously, as it is on digital channels.
That's as a marketer, this is a decision I made early on. I wanted to work on channels where it was easy to understand return.
Yeah.
PR, as you point to, people can attribute PR verbally to a lot of success, and I wouldn't question that necessarily, but a lot of clients want to see the data. And it's really hard to attribute PR. It often gets bucketed among other kind of marketing sources because it's not quite linear in the visit to the purchase. So it does make things complex. So it's not, you're right. It's not a question of can it help, but it's a question of being able to measure that support is a lot more challenging, and therefore, from some client standpoint, can seem like less value. Whereas ads, it's very easy to see this is the sale.
Yeah.
And as an agency, it's much easier for us to be able to report that to the client.
In particular, I can see how challenging it would be to measure PR when it's in the mix of a big marketing campaign at launch anyway. But over time, as things start to stabilize and you start to see, more consistent, let's say traffic to your website, more consistent conversions, if you suddenly see a spike in that and you had something come out in the press, then you can more closely attribute that spike back to that piece of coverage that you got, right? But maybe in the stew of the big launch, it's really difficult to know or attribute anything back to specific channels like PR.
Yeah, that's true. And as I said, perhaps if there's an e-commerce or perhaps the product's available, PR can be a wonderful outlet. But what you are going to face with Kickstarter or crowdfunding, you will face some skepticism, pushback from some media outlets. So it can just be a very time-consuming, intensive process as well.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here with the last question, which is, if you were to do it all over again, what one thing would you do differently, or what piece of advice would you have for people listening today?
I'm not one to regret anything or anything like that, because I do think that everything you do leads to where you are, and I like that.
Yep.
But something I think a couple of things that do come to mind is, one, being able to prioritize better. I talked about collecting data to try and prioritize my own sales efforts, but I could have done a much better job of that. I could have done a much better job of prioritizing building a team in the right way, and hiring the right people. Those kind of prioritizations. I didn't spend enough time always working on the business.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to quickly mention is value yourself. I think service providers have a really hard time valuing themselves.
Yep.
And almost feel guilty when they send proposals that they think are too much. And I don't know that I would go back and change that, but I think I wish I'd been more cognizant of that and had more faith in myself to know what I was worth.
Yeah. There's a story that I keep in mind whenever I think about that. And I knew somebody who went in, he received an offer for a job, and he went in and he said it was far more money than he, certainly needed and could ever imagine ever receiving, and was sort of surprised by what they put on the table. And I said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, I asked for 10% more. And I thought, well, this needs to be my inspiration right here, that there's somebody out there who's getting something or asking for something they think is ridiculous, and they're still asking for 10% more. I need to increase my prices. Yeah.
The market, unless you're being ridiculous, the market will.
Right. Exactly.
There's a market for your pricing, and
yes,
it's us feeling uncomfortable perhaps to present the market with that price. But I'm much better at that now, but that's probably something I wish I'd paid more attention to early on.
Yeah.
Well, that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this episode of Marketing Made Easy, please subscribe to Jottful's YouTube channel. That's JOTTFUL. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll meet you on the next one.